draft standards that said the internal auditors should be reporting on the effectiveness of risk management frameworks. The reality is a large percentage of internal auditors didn't know how to do a risk assessment themselves. How could they possibly report on the effectiveness of their company's risk management framework when they didn't know how to do a risk assessment? So there were a lot of problems. So the IIA's framework actually was a big step backwards because it caused the world to legislate weak first line models, where any big problems, if the second line and or the third line didn't find it, you have another crisis. Hence in 2008, we had another crisis. They were all using weak first line models. The board was not getting good data on the real risks being accepted in those organizations. And later, the most recent IIA in the summer just passed. The new 3 lines model talks about focusing on the important value creation and value preservation objectives. It's a big step in the right direction. The word defense is gone. It actually does say that management should focus on managing risks to objectives. It doesn't go so far as to say that they should be trained and expected to report on status, but they probably had big fights in the committee that developed it, because the exposure draft was just a reiteration of the old 2003. So the final product was a big step forward, I think, and you can read in my blogs, my posts on LinkedIn. Anybody that's really interested in learning about this can join my LinkedIn group. It's called Objective Centric Risk and Certainty Management. You can see all my posts, and it covers the release of the IIA's 3 lines model, what I like about it, what I dislike about it.
Great. And if we want to know if any organization has a strong first line under this model, what are the main characteristics, if you want, of this first line in any organization?
Well, the main characteristics are that management would all be expected to take a couple of days training and know how to assess and report on the significant risks to their most important objectives. You would expect to see owner sponsors of the most important objectives that would be reporting upward to the C-suite on whether they think the current certainty of achieving those objectives is or is not within the organization's risk appetite and tolerance. And the board would be receiving regular summarized reports from management on the current certainty / uncertainty of achieving objectives. Now, in that world, the risk department would be expected to provide a separate opinion on the reliability of management's reports. An internal audit would be expected to provide an overall opinion on the reliability of the data that's being used by the C-suite and the board to make decisions on what's okay and what needs to be fixed.
Why do you think that many organizations are reluctant to implement this concept? And what are the main challenges now to implement it?
Well, if you go back to the history that I told you, in the 90s, internal audit departments, and this was largely before there were risk management departments, they were seizing on the idea of a different role for internal audit. They were excited about it. There was acceptance all over the world. The IIA created a control and risk self-assessment conference. The first one that I organized and ran, we had 20 people. In the mid-90s, later 90s, it had become a full-blown annual conference that was run by the Institute of Internal Auditors. The Institute of Internal Auditors launched the certification in control self-assessment. A lot of excitement. They have since added a new designation called certification in risk management. risk management assurance. And there was a lot of excitement. Now, having said all of that, 2000 came along, Sarbanes-Oxley. Auditors have been relegated in many companies. Internal auditing is 70% Sarbanes-Oxley support, 30% doing other things. Because of the way that the regulators have brought in the idea that you should create risk lists and manage risks, risk departments, the vast majority of risk departments in the world, their primary methodology is building risk registers and risk lists and publishing risk heat maps. Now, all of that has taught both of those professions that the regulators want the internal auditors to be the control police and the risk profession to be the risk police. And unfortunately, that's a terrible situation because management does not see the output of either of those groups as being particularly helpful for them making better decisions and driving long-term success. So we're seeing a big, right now, the number of internal audit departments is steadily being outsourced. I just saw an internal audit department that had a $1.2 million budget US, wiped out, replaced with a $700,000 contract for 6 audits. That's because they don't care about the audits. So when management and boards don't care about the product, they just need to be able to say they have an internal audit department. Can you say you have one when you do 6 audits a year? Yes, you can say you have one. They can claim they're risk-based, and they can fixate and write subjective opinions on what they dislike and like about 6 things they looked at. Imagine how little of the real risk universe that audit department is looking at. Nobody seems to care. Now, the risk management groups, boards have tolerated seeing risk registers and risk heat maps now for, well, they started coming online in about 2010. So they're getting pretty tired. They're not getting a lot of great stuff out of the risk group, but the regulators still expect them to have a risk group that does risk stuff. So again, the risk groups now, you say, well, why wouldn't they all want to change? Well, we have human nature. They're afraid to put up their hand and say, look, what we've been doing isn't really that useful. We should be doing something quite different. Who's going to be the first one to say that? Well, I think the timing is getting good now. I think management is steadily unimpressed with the output from internal auditors and risk groups in the current forms that they're practicing. And I spend a lot of time getting my messages to boards of directors and CEOs. I write articles like, boards need to demand better information. CEOs need to get more from the money they're spending on internal audit and risk groups. So hopefully all of that will start to result in increase. The COSO ERM 2017 says ERM should be objective centric. The new IIA 3 lines model said it should be objective centric. So now we're starting to say, well, how many companies in the world can say that they're objective centric? If I had to guess, it's less than 1%.